And the most important thing that I wanted to transpose from the original game to our variant of the game was its ability to morph. The game's not stagnant.
What amazes me about the game is that it can change in an instant.
The board takes on many permutations. Over the course of a game, you might see one thing, and then sometime later you could see another thing.
The game will change. The game will grow. The game will fail.
Like you could be playing and you could have a certain setup and then things change. And then you could have another setup.
You never know how the board is going to look, and if you, I mean, it just amazes me. It has a life of its own.
It has a life of its, I mean, it really shows you.
You are not playing the same game twice, okay? That's just not happening.
You want to talk statistics, probabilities, realistic growth potential? It just doesn't work that way with Credo. It's not built that way. It's inherent. The game does not play itself twice. It's like cologne.
800 years ago, the Jewish people mourned the death of Rabbi Moses Maimonides, the illustrious Rambam. It was Maimonides who cut the precious diamond known as the 13 roots of the Jewish creed. During this octocentennial year, a group of enterprising university students turned to a mysterious etching from the Cairo Geniza to create a mind-bending challenge of faith for the 21st century. The name of the game, Credo 13.
Welcome to Credo 13. I'm Michael Kegel. The ninth root belief of the Maimonidean Creed is that the Torah is immutable. So don't touch that mute button.
The ninth principle is that the Torah will never be revoked.
Ani Maimonides believe with the full belief, Shezos Torah lo teh muchlefes.
It will never be changed, and it can never be changed.
The Torah is the eternal handbook.
The revelation of the Torah is once and for all.
He says no new Torah will come from God.
Not only the immutability of the Torah's text, but the Torah's message.
Since the Torah is the will of God, Maimonides concludes that it cannot change.
Because if something is perfect, there's no way of possibly improving upon it.
The Torah, as has been understood, is going to continue being the Torah. It won't change. It won't be added to. It won't be reduced. The commandments of the Torah continue.
Also, again, a very, very fundamental principle, especially in light of the fact that Christianity maintained the opposite.
I guess in a certain way, Rambam is responding to Christianity. You know, God has changed the law. Well, it ain't going to happen.
Because what kind of God is it that gives a law and then revokes it?
According to Yosef Albo, if there were a later revelation, if it had the same publicity that Mount Sinai had, and so on and so forth, then one could speak about a later revelation.
The problem with Christianity is it wasn't done public. It was done. They liked it. Who knows that this is a real prophecy? Who knows that Muhammad's a real prophet? It has to be done in a way that everyone would attest, that there will be no doubts.
Later, when Moses Mendelssohn presents this argument, he's writing for a certain audience, and he essentially wants to give an argument which will get him out of having to make any further arguments. Because, if God would come and there would be a revelation with equal publicity to that of Mount Sinai, read between the lines both for Albo and for Mendelssohn, and not like what the Christians claim, then we can talk. Meanwhile, I have nothing to say to you.
The Torah, or the revelation of Sinai, has eternal historical validity, and we should not expect it to have a new revelation on this level.
As it says in the Zohar, God looked at the blueprint of the universe, the rules. He looked at the rules and said, well, how I have to make man to be able to do these rules, so I have to make him in accordance with these rules. Ubara Alma, this is the manual, the blueprint of the universe. And this blueprint is eternal.
And if the blueprint is eternal, then presumably the structure must be permanent. Permanence is precisely what Jackie is aiming at in our Credo drama number 9. Her faith structure is so glued tight, it's a wonder that she can add anything to it at all.
Our world is being overrun by cosmetics.
I'm not sure what's real.
I'm thinking of dyeing my hair.
Are you saying highlights?
I'm not sure.
You could go blonde.
That might be too much.
Purple streak for character.
I don't want character.
What's your goal?
Change.
For the sake of change.
For the sake of color.
You're a great doctor. For hair dye, permanent.
Do I want permanent?
It's the only way to go these days.
My aunt had it done.
It's incredibly expensive.
Is it worth it though?
So they say.
To put a price on permanence.
So, how permanent is this dye?
Permanent.
You mean it won't fade?
I mean permanent.
Well, what about when my hair goes in?
This isn't about the hair. He goes into the follicle.
This is a whole.
It's a
looking
procedure.
at a whole. Is it painful?
Just for the first few months.
And then?
And then you get used to it.
But what if I don't like it?
Why would you dye your hair if you don't like it?
I just want to change. Just get one of those cheap do-it-yourself things from the drugstore.
No.
No?
No. This procedure repels all future dyes.
You mean you can never change your hair again?
And the operation can only be performed once.
Wow. This is not indecisive hair dye.
In other words, the operation Jackie is talking about negates the possibility of a subsequent hair color treatment repealing or amending this treatment.
Again, getting back to this idea of the Torah being eternal, I think it's important to speak out that Maimonides only put this forward to negate the possibility of a subsequent prophet repealing or amending the Torah.
Which goes together with the emphasis on the unique standing of Moshe Rabbeinu.
Remember, we're dealing with the 9th principle now, and therefore the 9th principle can follow from the previous 8.
No prophet can equal Moshe. That's it. You can't have a voice that equals the voice of Moshe.
Certainly before the Messianic era, and even afterwards, you're not going to have a prophet as great as Moses. So it can't happen. It's physically impossible for there to be a new Torah, because there'll never be another prophet. And if you're going to say, well, who are you to tell God there will never be another prophet? He has philosophical reasons for assuming as much.
In other words, since principle number 8 puts forward the proposition that the Torah that we possess was given by God to Moses, and we're not going to dispute that, so if the Torah itself makes the claim that it is the Torah for all times, so therefore we have it on God's word, that this Torah is for all times.
I think what Maimonides is saying here is that somehow in the transmission of Sinai is the statement about this principle, and that will come be Sroka Moshe Od, okay, that there will not be another prophet like Moshe. So the consequence of there not being any other prophet like Moshe is that you can't have anyone that could challenge Moshe's voice. Therefore, by definition, someone says, well, this law's got to change. By reason, I'm not going to listen to you because your validity does not stand up to the original statement of the original orders.
Since the Torah itself makes that claim that it is the Torah for all time, and knowing that God is omniscient and certainly knew the future, any subsequent prophet who would say that he has been sent to update the Torah is going counter to the prophecy of Moses, and therefore we know he's a false prophet on the basis of the 7th fundamental, which is that the prophecy of Moses is of unique standing.
Beyond that, he might very well hold that even if the Torah is immutable, the immutability would be a contingent byproduct.
Aside from the pragmatic reality that the law can't change because of the ability to challenge Moshe's prophecy, the reality is that there's a fundamental principle that the Torah is an eternal voice. It's an eternal statement.
It's a contingent byproduct of the content of the Torah rather than something inherent to the very nature of God revealing himself. If God reveals himself once, there should be no need to keep doing it until he improves upon it.
If the Torah is going to the greatest prophet, says one thing. What does it say about God if then he turns around and gives another Torah? This is supposed to be God's perfection manifesting itself in his commandments.
For the Rambam, you have that element of perfection. If you got it right, if you got it right the first time, there's no need to try it again, so to speak.
Jackie evidently did not get her faith structure right the first time. Compare. Here's before, here's after.
I'm more of a hat person myself. Hats are difficult. Not everyone can pull them off.
Difficult.
Hats are difficult. I've always been a hat person. That's lucky.
The younger you start with hats, the better.
Yeah, there's definitely a skill to wearing a hat.
And knowing what hat to wear with what.
That's an advanced skill.
I don't know if I'm there yet.
It takes a certain sensitivity.
Well, I only own one hat.
One hat? That's it.
It works with everything. That's not possible.
So where'd you find it?
A street vendor.
That's lucky.
I wouldn't call it luck.
It's more of a skill.
Hat wearing is complicated.
I know.
It takes practice.
Patience more than anything. Any occasion? I once wore it to go hang gliding and then out to a funeral that night.
Imagine a hat for all occasions. Then imagine a hat that never goes out of style. And then imagine that this is one and the same hat. A hat that never ever goes out of style for all occasions. Then you have some idea of what the eternity of the Torah might be like. Alas, people think of the Torah along more prosaic examples.
I'll give you an example. If I were to ask you, what is the perfect food for a baby? You would say mother's milk. But once the baby gets a little bit older, 1 year old, 1.5, 2 years old, the baby needs more. It can't derive all its nutrition from mother's milk. So one can make the same argument, that the Torah was given at a certain time, in a certain place. Perhaps it was the Torah for those conditions. But as human society developed and evolved, perhaps they needed new Torah. Perhaps there needs to be an update.
I think this principle becomes significant in the sense that it really defines much of the dynamic of orthodoxy. In fact, in the sense that orthodoxy believes that the law will not change, does not change.
In other words, if someone would say, well, the Torah was given before electricity, the Torah was given before nuclear energy, the Torah was given before modern medicines and before computers, etc. And therefore it has to be updated. That's a mistake. God gave the Torah knowing there'd be computers and knowing there'd be electricity and knowing there'd be all the modern conveniences we have, and nevertheless gave the Torah.
Of course, you have the example of Maimonides saying that sacrifices are a means to wean the Jewish people away from idolatry. Seems to be a temporary means and going to be abrogated in the future.
I think reality changes. I mean, it's very obvious we're living in a very different world. But if the Torah tells us that these principles are timeless, then we understand that these principles are going to be relevant under every possible situation that emerges.
100 years ago, women did not study Talmud. Now there's movements for women to study Talmud, but that's not because the law has changed. The principles of the law are exactly the same. It's perceived to be different circumstances, therefore the law is applied in a certain way differently, but the theory of the law is maintained.
The Torah could speak about oxen and donkeys and very primitive agricultural societies, but the underlying legal principles are still relevant and can be applied to automobiles and electricity and computers and so on and so forth.
Those people who are very attached to Torah know that there is a formula. They go back. They don't need new formula. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. There is a formula.
You know, even the British common law, which is the basis for our legal system in North America, also the principles were derived from cases that are hundreds of years old. The fundamental principles are unchanging. The applications may change, but the principles are timeless.
Maimonides is concerned, like all of us, and the Torah is concerned, not he, but he's concerned that people in the world have a tendency. Life is about gratification, achievement, and sometimes that leads to modification.
Our natural response to it is to try and say, gee, you know something, it's so difficult dealing with that. let's change it here. Let's change it there. Let's change the voice because it doesn't make sense anymore. It's like it's a given that's so hard for me to deal with in terms of a given. It creates tremendous tension.
You can't always only use 7.5 footers to play basketball. We have to have guys. Other people. Why should we exclude such a large population? Let's make it the rule. If you're 6 feet, you can play basketball. Okay, 6 feet, fine. The ball is a little too heavy. It's hard to draw. We're gonna make a soft ball, and I mean, it should be so big, it shouldn't be so heavy, so people can deal with it. Okay, we gotta lower the net. We gotta lower the net, make it a little lower. Instead of having it, whatever, 11 feet or 8 feet, whatever it is, we gotta put it down to 4.5, 5 feet. After a while, you can't recognize the game anymore. It's just not basketball anymore. It's something else, but it's something like looks like it, smells like it, but it's not basketball.
We live in a time where we have embraced certain ideologies, certain beliefs, certain isms. And now we ask the question, does the Torah conform to my preconceived notions of right or wrong? So there is the feminist critique of the Torah. There may be the capitalist critique of the Torah, or maybe the communist critique of the Torah. It's hard to know exactly which side the Torah takes on economic issues. And we ask ourselves, does the Torah have any relevance to a society which has embraced certain positions? The vegetarian critique of the Torah, etc. And I think that we have to understand that for the Jew, the Torah is the source of all value. So it's not a question, I am a feminist. And now the question is, does the Torah speak to me? To the serious Jew, all values emerge from the Torah.
Is Jackie confusing permanence with bulk, and therefore faith with blind dogma? I mean, look what she's done. She's built Notre Dame.
So, here's my concern.
Yes.
Let's say I dye my hair.
Yes.
And in a few years,
Let's say 2 or 3.
maybe 5 to 10, or even a few weeks, let's say by next Wednesday, things happen.
As things tend to do.
Countries rise and fall.
By next Wednesday?
Styles change. I'll become an outcast.
Style is external.
It's not real.
It's responsive.
Hair is active.
Hair is involved.
Style is fraudulent. But if my hair color is permanent,
It will not be changed.
and the world around me is changing,
That can never be stopped.
but my hair color is still permanent.
Permanence is not a burden.
It doesn't detract.
Permanence is forthright.
But is permanence forthright only when it's static and undynamic? Or is it possible for something to be both permanent and dynamic? What do we do, for example, when our modern moral conscience cries out against a very primitive sounding law in the Torah?
I'm checkmated on a lot of these questions. I don't know what we do when our modern moral consciousness screams one thing to us and the Torah seems to say the reverse. I don't know what to do, and be a happier man if I did, sleep a lot more if I did. But this is a terrible, terrible dilemma for us. And since I believe we cannot escape our skins, in which we can say that we believe in eternal Gentile slavery, and we can say that we think a rapist should be punished by a minimal fine, and we can say any one of these things. We can say that the infants in the cribs in Egypt deserve to die. But we can say it all we want. It doesn't work in a modern heart and a modern mind. And I don't think, even if you walk into the most fanatical Hasidic community in Muncie, and you would tell them, do you think it's right to sell Gentile infants away from their families, and for you to cart them off somewhere when they're 5 years old, away from the mothers and fathers, while the mothers and fathers and children are all screaming and crying and moaning, and that you can enslave them for the rest of their lives? I don't even think they would say it's okay, or that they understand it.
In reality, you can't return to 3,000 years ago because we don't have that revelation of 3,000 years. We are relating to a revelation of 3,000 years ago. But we don't have the option of change, even though change would seem to be the most simplest thing to do, easiest thing to do.
I don't think that this principle is telling us that reality tends not to change. I think reality is very, very much in flux. But the mitzvahs of the Torah somehow speak to each and every generation.
By presenting historical revelation and saying that this happens only at a point in history in a specific way, what you have to say is there's a certain movement in history that is desired by God. That for some reason it is His will that this revelation occur only at some point in history, and at another point in history it doesn't occur, which means that history is dynamic.
The fact that a mitzvah is timeless doesn't mean that it speaks to every generation in the same way.
That which occurs in the Sinai desert is different than that which occurs in Israel proper. A lot of commentators say that was one of the issues of the spies. That which is the ideal in one situation is not necessarily ideal in another situation.
In other words, God understood the mitzvah is timeless, but to each generation it may be sending a very, very different message.
God also commanded Adam one thing, and then Noah, he commanded something else. Now Noah could eat meat, whereas before you couldn't. Now that we have the Torah, we have to abolish certain practices that were done before. So it's not that God is changing, it's just that in accordance with different times, God's perfection is seen in a different fashion.
Not that the messages are mutually exclusive. All the messages are true. But there's a message which is uniquely poignant to this generation and a different message for the next generation.
If Sinai is the perfect revelation, how does it expand? And Ramosha says this in his ideas, that of course Torah expands with new ideas, and there's no kates, there's no border to Torah, there's no gvul to Torah, because Torah is constantly expanding through new ideas and new ideas, which implies that at Sinai, you didn't have the perfect revelation, because the revelation continues to expand through human wisdom interacting with the revelation.
So is there an evolving moral consciousness that the Torah is an early stage of in certain cases? Well, you're not going to get me to commit, endanger my eternal soul by commenting one way or another on that question, except to say that it's a heck of a tough question. I don't know the answer to it. And I don't expect to get a good answer this side of heaven.
Keep building the faith with Credo 13. Join us next week for the next root belief of the Maimonidean Creed. God is omniscient. Stay tuned for the Men in Black Hats on Messages up next.
So people ask me if I think in another 800 years, some other people will come and make a game based on our game. I don't think so. Maybe. But I don't think so. It's a very different world.